StrayAllDay.com.
Now tuned in to the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day, to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there, even when the success you've expected to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative, which is the go-getter energy that moves any one of us, including yourself, to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. Then we put all this together into one framework, one philosophy, one approach, one way of being. We wrote a book on the subject. We got more coming on it, and you are listening to the Daily Masterclass. All of this goes under one umbrella that is called Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day. Welcome to the show, and today we are going into part 3 of 4. I think we got 4 parts here. Part 3 of 4, where we are discussing the very concept of anti-racism and the book written How to Be an Anti-Racist, written by Mr. Ibram Kendi. Now, before we get into the next point that I'm laying out here, I'm going to tell you to have a text line where I want you to send me a text message. Tell me your questions, concerns, criticisms, best insights, best thing you got from what I'm talking about here today or any day here on the show. My direct number, 305-384-6894. Once again, 305-384-6894. Text me, add me to your phone, I'll add you to my phone, and you can tell me what's the most valuable thing you got from what we're talking about here today. Now, getting right into it, I've already given you the introduction. If you haven't heard parts 1 and 2, then I suggest you go listen to those right now. We're going right into part 3 here. We're starting at point number 10, as we've already done 1 through 9. Number 10, the concept of, or not the concept, but on the point of behavior in this book, where we're discussing anti-racism. Mr. Kendi talks about standardized tests, and his explanation and conclusion, I am 100% with him on when he talks his explanation and conclusion of the very concept of standardized tests. And he spends a good amount of time talking about it. And he talks about how when people do test prep, any of you who ever did like SAT prep, and we'll just talk about the SATs or maybe the ACT, either of those tests that you need to take to get a certain grade so you can get accepted into a certain college. He concludes that doing the test preparation and studying for that test does not necessarily make you smarter. What it does is it teaches you how to take the actual test. That's all. SAT prep does not make you a smarter individual. It just makes you smarter for the SAT. In other words, you're learning how to play the game, because getting into college or getting into a certain college probably is weighted pretty significantly, depending on what school you're trying to go to, on your standardized test scores. So knowing this, the wise people, what do? Or at least the parents of wise people, they learn to play the game. Okay, so part of the game is getting good standardized test scores so my kid can get into a good school. Okay, how do we play this game? We need to master this test. How do we master this test? Let me send my child to a SAT prep course so they'll be ready to master the test. This is one area of the book. This is one of the few areas of the book where me and Mr. Kendi are 100% on the same page. He analogizes this to learning how to play the game so you can get into school. I 100% agree with this. This is a work on your game philosophy. Play the damn game. Then when you get high scores on the tests, then you can go to a better school. Theoretically, you get a better job, theoretically. And what he then concludes, he goes on further to say, now this is the part where I said learning to play the game, that's the part where I 100% agree. Now I'm going into a different thing he says on the same concept. Then he says people go on, they get better jobs and live better lives with that better test score, all thinking because they're smart. They think it's because they're smart because they had these great SAT scores. And he's saying, no, it's not because you're smart, it's because you learn how to play the game. Now, to this point, I am agreeing with what he is saying. Now, he goes on. Now, this is where the agreement stops as we move on to the next thing he says. This is all on the same point of standardized tests. He goes on to call the system itself of standardized testing to determine who gets into what school, et cetera, et cetera. He goes on to call this system racist and unfair and says it excludes black people. I 100% disagree with this. It is not unfair, and here's why I disagree. It is not unfair that some people learn to play the game and others don't bother to learn to play the game. That is not racism. Everyone knows, anyone who's trying to get into a college, anyone who's listening to this right now, if you are trying to get into college or you have kids who are trying to get into college, you probably know that a standardized test score, an acceptable standardized test score, will be necessary to get into certain schools. And different schools have different standards as to what is acceptable when it comes to your score in a standardized test in order for you to get into that school. Anyone who's looking to get into college or has a family member who's trying to get into college probably is aware of that concept. So it's not racist that the game exists. Now, what he's calling racist is the fact that more white people or Asians are preparing for the standardized test, thus they do better on the standardized test, thus they're getting into better schools because they have better scores. That's not racism, that's the game being played. Those people are playing the game and some people are not playing the game. Listen, I don't know if I did any SAT prep, but I think I might have had an SAT, like a SAT prep book or some studying that I needed to do to get ready for the SAT, to prepare myself for the test. I don't know if I took a class. I don't remember doing that. I remember my sister, who was much more of a star academically than I was. I think she went and did some SAT prep and might have even had a tutor for the SATs. I mean, my mom's an educator herself, so maybe my mom was our tutor. I don't really remember. But my sister probably did really good in the SAT. I don't know exactly what she got, but she ended up going to an Ivy League school on a full scholarship. So let's assume that she did pretty damn good. That she's black, so I mean, now an anti-racist would say, well, that's just one exception. I would say that's one black person / black family / black household who understood the fucking game and they played the game. And that's why that black student was able to get into a prestigious university that many white kids wouldn't have got into because they just didn't have the stats that my sister had. My sister had the stats. She was able to get into these good schools because she played the game and she was good at playing the games. One thing to play the game, another thing to win the game. She was winning the game. And he's saying that this is racist because it excludes black people. Well, I just gave you an example of a black person who didn't get excluded. And I did pretty good on the SAT. I wasn't as amazing as my sister was combined with my high school scores. I wasn't as amazing as her, but I did pretty good in the SAT too. So it's not excluding black people. It's not unfair that some people are playing the game and other people do not play the game. This is called life, ladies and gentlemen. Some people understand the game of, hey, go to the library or go to Amazon, read some books so you can further your personal development after school. Some people do it and some people don't. That is not racism that if a bunch of white people go read books and a bunch of black people don't read books and thus the white people develop themselves more and they become further, advanced in life. And I'm just saying we just take some segment of whites and blacks. And the whites, those who read, get further advanced in life and those who don't are less advanced in life. That's not racism. That's just some people chose to take this action and some people chose to not take that action and do something different. That is not racism. It's available to everybody, but some people are just not taking advantage of it. Maybe it's not hyped up as much in one community as it is in another. That is not racism. That's just the information is not getting to that person or it's not being marketed to that person. Not that the information doesn't exist, it's just not being marketed to that person. If you want to do a certain thing, it is your job to find out the requirements for achieving that thing, and it's your job to go do what you need to do to get to the outcome that you want to get to. This is something I've been telling people forever. If you want to play professional basketball, or you want to get into a college, or you want to start a business, or you want to get a certain job, it is your responsibility to find out what are the requirements for getting that job or to getting in that career or getting into that industry or getting your foot in the door in this company. It is your job to figure those things out. It's nobody's job to market and promote those things to you. It is your job to figure it out. Now, if it's not something that is common in your community, because maybe nobody else in your community has ever done it before, that doesn't make it racist either. That just means you might have to do a little bit more work to get the info because nobody's throwing it in your face. But that doesn't make it racist. So he's making these flimsy arguments that this is racist because more white people are doing it than black people. No, that doesn't make it racist. Maybe it makes it more of a cultural norm in this group for people to do X, and in this group it's not a cultural norm. Therefore, less people are doing it. Therefore, we have further down the line results because it's not a cultural norm. Again, this does not constitute racism. This is a very weak argument. But again, when people are already agreeing with your point, then they're not even going to question anything that you're saying, which is, again, the genius of the book and is also the failure of the book at the same time. Now, what I'm saying here is, we're still on the same point, talking about standardized tests. It seems to me that Well, first of all, black people are not excluded from academic achievement. There are plenty of black people listening to this right now. People who have been clients of mine, people who I know personally, people who I've went to school with and sat in classrooms with, who are high academic achievers who are black people. All right, Mr. Kendi himself is an example of that. He isn't a graduate of a college. He's a professor himself. He's writing books. All right, he obviously has some academic sense and some intellectual skill that he brings to the table. And myself too. So there's two examples right there, even though we are not agreeing on his conclusions from this book. It just seems to me, and again, this is just my subjective observation, and anyone else, no matter what your background, you all went to school, you tell me. My subjective observation is that a larger percentage of Asians and whites seem to just be more interested in these academic achievements. When I was in school, the Asians that I went to school with, I'm talking high school, middle school, and high school, all right, they were 100% in on academics. That was their thing. That was their thing, was academics. Whereas with the white students, you had people in all different spaces. Some of them were hard on academics, some of them didn't care at all, and you had a bunch of people in between. When the black students, it was the same thing. Some of them hard on academics, some of them didn't give a shit, and then you had a whole bunch of people in between. With the Asian students, I don't remember a single Asian student that I went to school with. Again, this is just my subjective observation. This is not data. I don't remember a single Asian student I went to school with in middle school or high school who was not all in on academics. Not a single one. Now, what is that saying? Now, maybe that's a racist idea that I'm putting out there. I'm stereotyping Asian people. I don't think so, though. Why is this? Is because it's a cultural norm in their culture at that time that their families, their parents, instilled in their kids, you will go to school and you will achieve at a very high level academically. That was the culture. That was the norm. That was the expectation. That was the requirement. It wasn't even an expectation. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a requirement that you are going to do this. And that's why so many of them, they all came from different families, not like they was all in the same house. All these different Asian students that I came across, they were all on it like that. And any of you who went to school with Asians, you tell me if I got this wrong. This is just, and we're all from different places. If you ain't from the city of Philadelphia, you're from California, you're from New York, you're from Georgia, you're from Michigan, and you saw the exact same thing. How is that? How is it that we all saw the same thing? It's because it's a cultural norm in their culture that their kids go to school and they go hard on academics. Now, if you want to be involved in some other things on the side, extracurricular activities and all these other things, cool, but you better be doing that school thing because that is the cultural norm in their community. In other communities, you got some people who is the norm based on your household and who's raising you, and some people, nobody gave a damn. And if you didn't do it, then you just didn't do it. And that's just what the game is. Sometimes in life, you just are in a situation where it's not expected of you to do a certain thing. You don't do it. That's not racism. It's just how it is. That's just the way the game is laid out. That is not racism at all. It is cultural norms and the way that the expectations are set upon you. I saw this with my own eyes in school, and you could tongue-in-cheek call it a stereotype, but it's not a stereotype because it fucking happened. And again, you tell me what you saw. That's the test. And Mr. Kendi, in his book, he goes on to say that the test preparation classes, the classes that get you ready to do well on the SAT or the ACT, that many of these classes are usually focused in Asian and white communities, meaning the places that you actually go to get ready for the test. You don't see these kind of test prep classes offered so much in black communities. They're mostly focused in white and Asian communities, and he's calling this racist. That is complete bullshit. That's not fucking racist. What it is business people doing business. Listen, if I'm running an SAT prep class, where am I going to put my class? Let me ask you that question. I'm gonna let you think about that before I give you the answer. I'm gonna take a sip of my water while you think about where, and Nico, lead us blink in. I want to make sure that the space is in there because I want to give people space to think here. Where would you put your SAT prep class if you were building a business around teaching people to get ready for the SAT? Where would you put the class at to serve your business? All right, I'm done taking a sip of my water. So now let me remind you before I give you the answer, and hopefully you already got it. Remind you that the purpose of your business is to serve your clientele. And the purpose of your business is to make money. And you make money by serving the people who actually want what you're offering, who are buying what you're selling. In other words, selling to your buyers, something that I've been talking about for years. So if I'm running an SAT prep class, me personally, Dre Baldwin, a black man from the hood, where am I going to put my SAT prep class? I'm going to put it where there are people who want to fucking sign up, show up, and use it. That's where I'm going to put it. And guess, in my subjective observation of my life, who are the people that sign up for SAT prep classes? Now, I'm not going to base my business on my subjective observation. I'm going to base it on data. I'm going to go find out I'm going to go find out people who already have SAT prep classes, businesses. Who signs up mostly for your class? What type of people take it most seriously? What type of people are most willing to invest in it? They're going to probably tell me Asians. You know where I'm going to set my class up? In an Asian community. You know why? Because they're the people who are going to fucking buy what I'm selling. And I'm in business to make money. I'm not putting my business in the middle of the hood with a bunch of black people where their families ain't telling them to go to school. They ain't giving a damn about getting ready for the SAT prep class because they ain't buying the shit. I ain't going to make no money. I'm going to go out of business trying to sell to people who ain't buying what I'm selling. If I'm doing classes on teaching people how to make it to the NBA or the NFL, I'm not basing that training facility in an Asian community because they ain't trying to send their kids to the NBA and NFL. I'm gonna put that in the hood with the black people because they all trying to become basketball and football players. This is just the game, ladies and gentlemen. This ain't racism. This is not stereotyping. This is me being a business person playing the fucking game. So him saying here that these test prep classes are in Asian and white communities as if that's some form of systemic racism or policy racism. No, it ain't. Mr. Kendi, why don't you go put an SAT test prep class in the hood with a bunch of black people? Let's see how much money you make. All right, and then once you start two of them, put one of them in the black community with a bunch of black people and put one of them in the Asian community with all Asians, and let's just see which one makes more money. Let's just see which one is getting more phone calls. Let's just see which one is bringing more people into its sales funnel. Which one has more leads? The one in the black community or the one in the Asian community? Now listen, in certain black communities, maybe that test prep class will do great. But in Asian communities, everyone probably won't do good every single time. Why? Because it's a cultural norm for them. This is how they raise each other to do. Now, if I have any Asians listening to me, listen, you let me know. Let me know if am I stereotyping too hard here? Is this wrong? Did you take an SAT prep class yourself? As I explained, test preparation, teaching people to get ready for an SAT, is a business. And businesses focus on customers. Test prep classes are concentrated where people are buying. So if you see test prep classes concentrated in Asian and white communities, there's a reason for that, because these business people are not idiots. They would go out of business if they were in the wrong places. They are in the places where the parents understand and accept the game for what it is. The game being do well on the test, you can get into a good college. They play the game, and they're willing to pay to play that game. Meaning, let me pay $1,000 for my kid to get ready for the SAT, because that $1,000 investment today at age 17, whatever it is, will pay off 10 years from now when my kid is making $150,000 in their career because they went to a good school, made good connections, got themselves a good job after school. This is the long game that they play. And we talked about time perspective. Back in, I'm gonna tell you what episode where we talked about that in. That was episode number 777, the concept of time perspective. People who become more successful in life think further ahead with the decisions that they make than people who are unsuccessful. Less successful people think more about their instant gratifications, whereas more successful people are willing to delay gratification. Now, I'm not saying that necessarily black people are less successful than Asian people because they don't pay for test prep classes. I'm just drawing a further line here from the point that I'm making. The very concept, though, going back to getting granular here in this point, Asian and white parents understanding the game, play the game, and are willing to pay for the game, apparently more than black people. Again, the data, according to Mr. Kendi in his book, the test prep classes are in the Asian and white communities because those are people who are buying it. They sell to the buyers. Now, this is not saying that black people as a whole do not get into that. My parents, I'm pretty sure, did something. They made some type of investment in SAT Pro. I know I had like a little booklet, or if I didn't have anything else, I at least had the little booklet, and the booklet wasn't free. But people make choices. There is no intelligence gap between the races. It's not like black people are just inherently smarter or dumber than other people of other races. That isn't true. But there is a willingness to do the work gap that is cultural and obvious, at least when it comes to academics. I saw it subjectively, and it probably can be proved empirically. I think it already has been proved many times empirically just by this very example that is being shared by the author of this book. Mr. Kendi goes on to say, that the score gap, that the average score gap between Asians and whites and black people means something is wrong with the test. Doesn't mean there's something wrong with the people. This is 100% false. He is saying that since Asians, let's just use Asians here, since Asians score higher than black people on the SAT on average, that means something's wrong with the test. No, Mr. Kendi. That doesn't mean something's wrong with the test. It doesn't mean something's wrong with the people either. So he's saying something's wrong with the test, not the people, but he's drawing this false comparison between the two when neither one of them is the actual issue. The issue is, in between the two, the preparation. Is the culture around the tests. Is the culture around how much do academics matter. Is the culture around you're going to do your schoolwork and that's going to be your main focus over everything else. It's a gray area in that space in between, well, does the person need to do something or does the test need to change? There's a gray area there, but understand, here's the problem with the gray area that I'm laying out right here, everybody. Gray areas don't sell books. This is why the gray area doesn't get discussed. Now, you're going to sell too many books talking about the gray area, but you will sell books drawing hard conclusions and saying, well, this must be racist because look at the data. The flimsy data, weak data, bad data, but it sells books. And he's done a great job of selling books. I just told you in episode 1777 that the truth is never sexy. In other words, why not to trust the media or not to trust media, period. That means don't trust books, don't trust authors, don't trust social media, don't trust podcasters. The truth is never sexy. The truth is usually lying somewhere in the gray area in between the extremes that people lay out for you. I just told you this 10 days ago. Mr. Kendi, he doesn't live in gray areas. He lives in the extremes. The truth is never at the extreme. But he wants you to believe that it is. And this is sensational and sensationalism sells. So he understands the marketing side of it, but as far as informing people and helping them, this book 100% fails. As a whole, the fact that businesses aren't focused in a certain community should be examined. All right, why is this business not in the community? Is the business racist, or is the business just selling products where the products are going to be bought? I think that's a simple question that anyone worth their weight in books could actually do the research on and find out before they printed in a book. But of course, this book wasn't based on giving people actual useful information. It was based on making you agree with a certain conclusion. Moving on to point number 11. Today's topic, once again, we are addressing the concept of anti-racism in the book by Mr. Ibram Kendi. Number 11, the author mentions how blacks are even discriminate against each other based on skin tone in the North back in the days of migration. After slavery ended and some blacks from the South started to move up to the northern part of the United States and assimilate with blacks who had been free already, that certain black people from the North were discriminating against fellow black people, but these are black people from the South. This assumes that it was based on, and he's saying it was based on skin tone. He was saying that certain black people who had a darker skin tone were being discriminated against by black people who had a lighter skin tone. I don't think that that was the reason. Thomas Sowell, and the reason why I'm saying this, because Thomas Sowell, who I mentioned in the previous episode, he goes into this himself in his books talking about race. There's one called Intellectuals and Race, another called Black Rednecks and White Liberals. But I personally have nearly 40 years of experience being black. Now, I don't care what skin tone a black person is on whether I'm going to deal with that person or not. You know what I care about? I care about your actions. I care about your culture. I care about the way you carry yourself. I care about the environment around you. I don't care what tone of black you are. Actually, I don't even care what skin tone you are, period. Black, white, whatever. I'm looking at your actions. I don't like weed smoke. I don't like the smell of weed smoke. I'm not against anybody who smokes weed. It's pretty much going to become legal everywhere pretty soon. But I don't like the smell of weed. I don't want to smell weed when I'm in my house. I don't like loud music coming from other people's homes. I do not like any kind of generally disturbing behavior. I don't like people being all loud and raunchy and carrying themselves as if they ain't got no sense. I don't like, there's a lot of things I don't like. I don't like trashy neighbors. I don't like people disrespecting the property in general. I like living in a condominium building, so there's a bunch of people living in very close proximity to each other. These are the type of things I don't like. I don't care what color the person is who's doing it. If generally disturbing behavior is your MO, I don't want you as a neighbor. I don't give a damn what color that individual is. I don't care where you're from. Kendi tends to lean towards straw manning this whole color argument in order to dismiss behavior outright. So he's kind of making this, oh, well, people are doing it because of the skin tone of the black person or whatever, and he's just dismissing behavior outright. He doesn't go really deep into the concept of the behavior of certain people. And it made little sense to me when I was reading it, why he was doing it, why he was dismissing it. But now as I've talked through this with you, you can see why he's doing it, because I've already explained it to you. He didn't care about actually getting you the hard information that you decide on your own. He already decided for you when he started writing the book, and everything he writes has to point to the same conclusion that he's trying to get you to get to. Point number 12. We are talking today again about the concept of anti-racism and discussing Mr. Ibram Kendi's book. There are too many reaches in this book. He makes way too many reaches. I've explained a few of them already to support the general thesis of this concept of anti-racism. For example, Mr. Kendi references Chris Rock's famous skit that he did back in the 90s where he was talking about the difference between black people and niggas. And any of you who have never seen that skit, please go look it up on YouTube. Where Chris Rock, I'm going to paraphrase what he said. I'm not going to drop a punchline, but what Chris Rock was saying was that a lot of times people, he was just talking, he was telling jokes, but he was telling a lot of truth in jest. And he was saying that when he was saying black people need to clean up their behavior, and he's saying that some people say, well, no, it's not black people's behavior that's the problem these days, it's the media. The media is portraying black people's behavior as being negative, so then it makes black people look bad. And Chris Rock said, no, fuck that. It's not the media that is causing black people to look bad, it's niggas making black people look bad. And he uses an example. He says something like, when I'm bringing a new 60-inch TV into my house, I'm not sneaking it in the middle of the night because I'm afraid of the media. I'm sneaking it in because I'm afraid of niggas seeing me bring this new TV in my house because they might try to break in my house and steal it. When I'm moving into a new neighborhood, I'm not looking around for the media. I'm looking around for how many niggas are standing on the corner because I don't want to live in a neighborhood where they're around. And he was joking, but he was telling a whole lot of truth at the exact same time. And Kendi actually references this skit in his book and says that Chris Rock is, quote, grouping, close quote, certain blacks in a certain way and is wrong. That is wrong, and in turn, it's racist. So he said what Chris Rock said back then was racist because he was grouping certain black people. But let me let all of you know something, especially those of you who are not black and even those of you who are black. I do the exact same thing, and damn it, if that makes me racist, then fuck it, I'm racist. Because I don't want no niggas living around me. Loud, raunchy, not having any class, don't know how to conduct themselves, trashy. I don't want to hear no weed smoke. I don't want to hear your fucking music. Just people, they got all kinds of different kinds of people who look like shady characters in and out all the time. I don't want none of those niggas around me. So if that makes me racist, then I, Drake Baldwin, am a motherfucking racist. It is a much a reach by Mr. Kendi to bring this skit into the theme of his book. It's a serious reach. All right? This is the kind of reach that you could call for a foul in basketball, reaching in like this one when he used this one right here. I 100% get it that he had to throw this in there because when you have a publisher and you sign a traditional publishing contract, you are contracted to write a certain amount of words. So maybe this was just filler that he had to put in there to make sure he hit his word number. But in any other circumstances, this section of the book, he should have left out. All right, this is part of the book that he should have wrote. He should have figured something else out to go in here. By the same token, after he says this, Mr. Kendi says that grouping instead of individualizing behavior is racist. So if you group people together, you're being racist. But if you individualize it, instead of individualizing, it's racist. But that conflicts with the basic idea of the book, which is individual failure is not a failure of the person, it's a failure of policy. Which again, just puts big question marks in my mind. Where in some areas he's saying that if an individual comes up short, it's because of the policy. But then he says when you group instead of individualizing behavior is racist. So if someone does something individually, you point it out, oh, it must be because of the policy. But if you group people together who are doing certain things, then you're being racist. It just raises more questions than it gives answers. And this is another failure of this entire book. Moving on to point number 13. Today's topic, once again, we are addressing the concept of anti-racism in Mr. Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Number 13, a higher percentage of black people said racism is the reason that blacks can't get ahead, according to some study, data, research that Mr. Kendi is referencing. Now, there are plenty of polls and research that could be done on that. So he cited some research where some percentage said this: racism is the reason blacks can't get ahead. And he loved this. He applauded this conclusion. I'm shaking my head at that. But there was about a third of those same people who were polled who said conversely that it was someone's own fault when they can't get ahead. These are black people. So 2/3 said it's racism. He was happy about that. But the 1/3 who said, no, it's not racism that makes a person not get ahead, a black person not get ahead, it's their own fault that they're not getting ahead. And Mr. Kendi labels that 1/3 of people, a quote, racist position. He's saying that it's racist if you tell somebody that your failures are your fault. He goes on to say, to follow up that racist position, he says these are anti-black racist ideas. All I can say to that is, wow. Capital letters, W-O-W. Wow. So basically, I'm racist. I think from at this point of our conversation that I have to admit that I must be racist if we are following the anti-racist handbook here, which we are discussing over these episodes. Telling somebody that their lack of achievement is their fault. I guess specifically we're talking about black people. This book is focused on black people. That makes you racist. So any of you who's listening to this right now, who you agree with the general principle that your success or failure is based on your action or lack of action, and if someone's failing is basically based on what they've done or not done, then you are racist. You are anti-black, you have racist ideas, you hold a racist position, and you are doing the exact opposite of being anti-racist, which means you are, in fact, a racist. In case you didn't know, now you know. That is sarcasm. Point number 14. Today's topic, we are addressing the concept of anti-racism. Here's the best idea that Mr. Kendi produced in this book. The best thing that he said, and this is probably the shortest point that I have of this whole discussion. He said that black people do have power. And because sometimes people say something like, and there was a time it was actually last summer where I think he still plays, NFL player, Deshaun Jackson, wide receiver, he had posted some misattributed quote to, I believe it was Adolf Hitler, that had said some anti-Semitic concept about Jewish people. And it was quickly debunked when he posted it on social media. He said but Hitler said this thing about Jewish people. And I guess he was trying to make some point about black people, but he completely failed. And he didn't help black people's cause by making that point, because I guess he was trying to make himself look intelligent, but he made himself look like a stupid athlete who probably should just stick to sports. And it was an anti-Semitic thing that he posted. And after he posted it, then a former NBA player, Steven Jackson, he jumps on social media and he co-signs the point that Deshaun Jackson made himself look stupid in the process, made both of them look dumb. And then on social media the next day, I saw it was a clip from ESPN, and the ESPN guys are in the studio and they're addressing it. And I believe it was Jalen Rose. I'm pretty sure it was Jalen Rose who was asked the question, what do you think about this? Is it racist? Is it wrong? Et cetera, et cetera. And Jalen Rose made the argument, and I'm paraphrasing what he said. He was saying that it's not really racist what either of those guys said, because you can't be racist when you don't have power. You have to have power to be racist. So he was defending these black guys by saying black people don't have power, so it's impossible for black people to be racist. That's 100% incorrect, because I just admitted to my own racism in a sarcastic way. Black people do have power, because the only people who don't have power are victims and losers. Now, I already admitted that I'm not a victim, so I do have power, so I definitely can be racist. And Ibram, in his book, he does come to a point where he says that black people can be racist against their own, and they can be racist against white people. So this is a strong argument on his point on two fronts. Number one, he's making clear that anyone can be racist and that everyone has the power to exude racism. And number two, he is also making it clear that just because you are black doesn't mean you can't be racist at all. You can show racism towards white people with your ideas, and you can show racism to your fellow black people with your ideas. And there are black people who do have some, I think, racist ideas, not based on his ideologies and what his framework that he lays out. But this is a solid point that he brings us up because it debunks anyone who tries to use that cover up. Anytime a black person says something stupid, like Deshaun Jackson said and was co-signed by Steven Jackson, listen, that is racist. I don't care how much power you think you don't have. If you have the power to get people to talk about it on ESPN, if your reach is big enough that ESPN does a segment talking about what you posted on Instagram, you have power. And you absolutely are racist. So I'm glad that he made that point. One of the more solid points that he makes in the book, that he doesn't fuck it up by adding something else that will water it down. So all that said, let's recap today's class, which is we are on part 3 of 4, where we are discussing the anti-racist book by Ibram Kendi and the very concept of it. Number 10, it talks about the concept of behavior and how people learn how to play the game when it comes to something like standardized tests. And it is part of playing the game. That part I agree with, but then he goes on and destroys the agreement by saying that it's racist that these test prep classes are focused in Asian and white communities. That is not racist. That is just business. In the business world, people focus on the buyers. If black people ain't buying, and they're not going to sell in those communities. That is not racism. And the test itself is not racist. The people, there's nothing wrong with the people who are failing the test. What's wrong is the culture and the ideas and the expectations around the testing, which is a gray area, which we can't make stats about and you can't draw hard conclusions about. Unfortunately, any point that cannot be thrown, have a stat thrown at it or a hard conclusion thrown at it, does not fit Mr. Kendi's framework. Therefore, it didn't fit into the book. This is how he is misleading you with this bad data and these flimsy arguments that he is making. Point number 11, he mentions how blacks even discriminated against each other based on skin tone in the North. I don't think it was based on their skin tone. According to Thomas Sowell's book, it was based on their behavior. Listen, I'm not discriminating against a black person because they're darker than me or lighter than me. I'm discriminating against you because you make too much fucking noise. You are too loud. I don't want to smell weed coming out of your apartment. And that's why I don't want you living next door to me. I don't give a damn what color you are or what race you are or where you're from. And we base things on people's behavior. You are your behavior. You are not. It is not about your skin tone. Number 12. He makes way too many reaches to support his thesis, one of them being talked about Chris Rock's black people versus niggas skit. And there is a difference between black people and niggas, and every black person who is listening to this, you know that there's a difference. Maybe you don't want to admit it. Maybe you don't want to talk about it because you're on this social justice wave. I get it, but listen, let's call a spade a spade. This show, we will always do that. And number 13, he said a higher percentage of blacks said racism is the reason that blacks can't get ahead. This is bullshit. The people were talking about this back 30, 40 years ago, talking about, well, we can't get ahead because we're black. All right, it's been 30 years. You still using that same argument that you are a loser. You are in the same place that you were 30, 40 years ago, using the exact same excuses. You must be a fucking idiot. You had 30 years to learn and do something different, and you didn't do it. That means something's wrong with you. It's not something wrong with the system. The system ain't that good. And number 14, but Mr. Kendi makes a good argument that black people do have power and they absolutely can be racist. If a black person says something racist against a Jewish person or a white person or a Latin person, that is racism. I don't care how much power they claim to not have. If you say something that affects someone to the point that they're pointing out your racism, then you do have power. Claiming that you don't have power just so you can hide behind your racism is a bullshit argument of victims and losers. Make sure you're not being one. Tell me the most valuable insight or thing you're most concerned with that you want to challenge me on from today's episode. Send me a text, 305-384-6894. Once again, 305-384-6894. Work on your game. Dre all day.